When we talk about having total control over an environment, we usually think of it kind of like programming a video game.
Right.
Like you drop a tree here, you spawn a character over there, you set the weather to sunny, and everything just behaves exactly as you coded it. It's perfectly obedient.
If only it were that easy.
Right. But if you try to build a living ecosystem inside a glass tank in your living room, you realize very quickly that nature absolutely does not read your code.
No, it really doesn't.
You're not the architect. You're more like a highly stressed diplomat trying to negotiate this super fragile peace treaty between water chemistry, algae, and like some incredibly stubborn fish.
And that peace treaty is honestly always one bad water change away from total collapse.
Yeah.
You are constantly managing the fallout of these biological processes that you can maybe influence, but you can never entirely control.
Exactly. And that tension, that constant struggle between control and chaos, that is exactly what a writer named Ang has been negotiating for, well, hundreds of days. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are unpacking this really incredible milestone retrospective from July 28th, 2026. It's Ang's 300th post on the really meticulous art of fish keeping.
Yeah, and just to give you some context on the dedication here, it took Ang from February all the way to July just to get from post 200 to post 300.
It's intense, and our mission for you today is to extract the practical, hard-earned wisdom from this, honestly, master tinkerer. Because while the subject is aquatic life, this is really a masterclass in the relentless pursuit of perfecting a microenvironment.
It really is. It's an exercise in extreme iterative learning. And what stands out immediately in these recent 100 posts is Ang's hyper-focus on this very specific challenge, which is the art of breeding smaller cichlid varieties.
Right.
We are talking specifically about the golden mabuna and the crebensis cichlid.
Which, if you know anything about aquatic husbandry, is not just a matter of, like, putting a male and a female in the same water and putting on some smooth jazz.
Definitely not.
Ang has been dedicating entire tank setups solely to inducing these fish to spawn. And when I was reading this section of the notes, it felt way less like setting a romantic mood and a lot more like trying to hack a biological algorithm.
I mean, that is a much better way to look at it, honestly. You are basically trying to spoof a wild organism's data inputs.
Right. You have to convince an animal that's operating on literally millions of years of survival instinct that this synthetic glass box is actually a pristine, resource-rich riverbed.
Exactly.
Like if the temperature is off by 1 degree or the pH doesn't signal the right season, the algorithm just says, nope, do not reproduce, the offspring won't survive. You're essentially trying to artificially trigger a biological green light.
Yeah, because in the wild, breeding is triggered by really complex environmental shifts.
Like what?
Well, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure and cooler water that might simulate the onset of the rainy season. And to the fish, rainy season means an impending abundance of microfood for the fry. So to replicate that indoors, it requires manipulating water hardness, tweaking the diet to include live foods, and even providing highly specific terrain, like literally the exact shape of a cave for a crebensis to claim as its territory.
Yeah.
It's an intense level of mechanical and chemical manipulation.
But here's the crazy part. Despite all of that effort, Ang actually admits to having, quote, limited success with the actual breeding of these two species.
Right.
But what really struck me is that Ang doesn't view this as a failure at all. This entire 100-post stretch is framed as a massive win.
Because the secondary yield of that experiment is just so high. Ang failed to consistently hack the breeding algorithm, sure, but in the process, gain this profound, really granular understanding of the environment itself.
Yeah, the baseline stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you manipulate water chemistry every single day for months trying to trigger a spawn, you learn the baseline parameters of your system inside and out.
Yeah.
You learn exactly how your specific tap water buffers against pH swings, or, how quickly nitrates build up when you overfeed live foods.
Yeah. It's like you lose the battle, but you map the entire battlefield.
That's exactly it.
Which is actually a perfect segue into how Ang applied that baseline knowledge. Because once you understand the chemical reality of your water, you have to build the physical structures to maintain it. And Ang arrived at two major conclusions for tank setups, starting with the absolute necessity of the sponge filter.
A classic tool.
Right. Ang writes that it's critical for keeping the tank clear, filtering debris, and preventing algae blooms. But I actually have to push back on this a little bit.
Oh.
Yeah, because Aang is incredibly dedicated to aquatic plants. And if you have a tank that is heavily planted, shouldn't those plants just act as the filtration? I mean, they consume biological waste. Why do
Yeah.
you still need this ugly piece of synthetic foam bubbling in the corner?
It's a really common assumption, especially for anyone trying to build a quote-unquote natural setup.
Right, you want it to look wild.
Yeah, we look at a heavily planted tank and we see a self-sustaining slice of nature. But a planted aquarium is ultimately a closed system. In a real river, you have constant water volume turnover, immense dilution, and these really deep substrates full of diverse microfauna that process organic matter.
It's flushing it out constantly.
Exactly. But in your living room, the bioload, meaning the total amount of waste produced by the fish, the decaying food, and even the dying leaves from your plants, all of that is trapped in a static volume of water.
So the plants alone just can't keep up with the bioload.
Not even close, especially not in a densely stocked tank. Look, fish excrete ammonia, which is highly toxic. Now, plants do take up some nitrogen, but they often prefer it in other forms. They simply don't absorb ammonia fast enough to prevent a massive spike.
Got it. So that's where the sponge filter comes in.
Right. It provides mechanical filtration by trapping floating particulate matter, sure. But more importantly, the porous structure of that foam provides this massive surface area for beneficial, nitrifying bacteria to colonize.
The nitrogen cycle.
Precisely. Those bacteria are the invisible engines of the tank.
They do the heavy lifting.
They really do. They consume the highly toxic ammonia and convert it to nitrites. And then another set of bacteria converts those nitrites into nitrates.
Which the plants like.
Exactly. Nitrates are much less toxic, and your aquatic plants can easily absorb them. Without that sponge filter acting as a high-capacity biological processing plant, the nutrient levels in the water column just spike.
And then what happens?
The moment that happens, opportunistic algae take over. They smother the leaves of your higher-order plants, they block out the light, they deplete the oxygen at night, and honestly, the whole system crashes.
Wow. So when I look at this crystal clear, beautifully planted aquarium, I'm actually just looking at an incredibly efficient waste management facility operating at a microscopic level.
You are.
Yeah.
And Aang's realization here is just deeply pragmatic. You cannot rely on the romance of a self-sustaining ecosystem when you're operating within the strict constraints of 10 or 20 gallons. You have to blend biological elements with mechanical intervention.
That pragmatism completely drives Aang's second big discovery, too, which is the substrate, the material lining the bottom of the tank.
Oh yeah, the sand.
Yeah. The aquarium industry markets all these highly specialized, crazy, expensive gravels and soils. But Aang pivots entirely away from the pet store and discovers that fine construction sand, like literally the stuff you buy in 50-pound bags at a hardware store, is actually the ultimate substrate.
Which is brilliant for a few reasons, but primarily biological ones.
How so?
Well, many of the smaller cichlids Aang is keeping, and honestly cichlids in general, they fall into a category of fish often referred to as earth eaters.
Earth eaters, okay.
Yeah. In the wild, their primary foraging behavior involves taking mouthfuls of sand, sifting it through their gills to extract microscopic invertebrates and detritus, and then expelling the clean sand.
Like a biological sieve.
Exactly. But if you put them in a tank with that standard chunky aquarium gravel,
They can't do it.
no, they can't perform their natural foraging behavior. And worse, if they try, the coarse, jagged edges of that synthetic gravel can cause severe gill damage, or it gets lodged in their digestive tracts and causes impaction.
Oh.
The industry sells this colorful, chunky gravel because it looks clean to the human eye, and it's easy for us to vacuum. But it is entirely counter to the evolutionary physiology of a cichlid.
It's essentially prioritizing the aesthetic preference of the human over the biomechanics of the actual animal.
Yep.
But Aang just circumvents all that marketing. It's kind of like buying generic pharmaceuticals, right? You can buy the shiny box at the pharmacy for $20, or you can go down an aisle, find the exact same active ingredient in a plain bottle for $3, and it does the exact same job.
Exactly.
Aang goes to the hardware store, buys a massive bag of construction sand for a fraction of the cost, and the target audience, meaning the fish, actually prefer it because it mimics their natural riverbed.
It really highlights a maturity in the hobby. When you start, you rely on the commercial supply chain to tell you what your animals need. But when you reach a certain level of expertise, you just look at the raw mechanics of the environment.
Rocks are rocks. Sand is sand.
Right. As long as it is chemically inert and properly washed, construction sand is a functionally superior and highly cost-effective solution.
But that DIY pragmatism hits a really hard wall when it comes to the plants themselves. You can fake the riverbed with construction sand, but you cannot fake the sun.
No, you can't.
Ang notes that indoors, duckweed is the undisputed champion. It survives, it multiplies, it does the job. And outdoors, in the balcony ponds, both duckweed and common salvinia thrive. But the moment Ang tried to branch out and keep other aquatic plant species indoors, things went sideways. Ang discovered this unbreakable constraint, the 6-hour sun rule.
Yeah, most aquatic plants simply die without at least 6 hours of full direct sun exposure daily.
And, okay, as an outsider to this hobby, my first instinct is, why is that a problem? We have incredible technology now. Just buy a high-powered LED light, clamp it over the tank, and leave it on for 12 hours. Why does it have to be the actual sun?
It comes down to something called PAR, photosynthetically active radiation.
Okay.
It's not just about how bright the light appears to the human eye. It's about the specific wavelength of light that chlorophyll actually uses to photosynthesize. And the intensity required to push those wavelengths through a dense medium like water.
Oh, because water absorbs the light.
Exactly. The sun is basically a localized fusion reactor.
Right.
It's delivering full-spectrum radiation with enough intensity to penetrate the water column all the way down to the substrate.
Right.
To replicate the PAR values of direct tropical sunlight in your living room, like penetrating 18 inches of water just to keep a carpeting plant alive on the bottom, it requires highly specialized, high-wattage lighting fixtures.
Which I'm guessing are not cheap.
They are incredibly expensive to buy, they're expensive to run, and they generate a massive amount of heat.
Oh, which messes with the water temperature.
Yep, which then triggers the algae blooms we talked about earlier.
It's a total cascade of unintended consequences. So rather than fighting that losing battle, Ang just accepts the physical limitation. Duckweed stays indoors because it floats right at the surface near whatever ambient light is around, and the demanding plants stay out on the balcony where the sun just handles the heavy lifting for free.
Which is really just another form of resource management. You allocate your biological assets based on the environmental energy that's actually available.
But this realization that commercial indoor solutions have a hard ceiling, it isn't just happening with the plants. Ang is hitting the exact same ceiling with the fish supply chain.
Yeah, the local fish stores.
Right. The notes detail these regular trips to the pet store, but Ang consistently has, quote, nothing particular to report. The generic inventory just isn't cutting it anymore. So Ang is now actively seeking out small-scale hobbyist fish farms.
This is a classic inflection point for anyone deeply invested in a niche discipline.
How so?
Well, the commercial pet store is designed for the median consumer. They stock hardy, visually appealing, genetically generic fish that can easily survive the stress of the global supply chain.
Right, they need tough fish that sell well.
Exactly. But when you are spending 300 days trying to map the exact breeding parameters of a very specific cichlid, you completely outgrow the median. You need specialized genetic lines. You need wild-caught F1 generations.
You basically need to talk to someone who understands the difference between a water hardness of 4 and a water hardness of 6.
Precisely. You seek out this underground network of basement breeders and hobbyist farms because that is where the actual institutional knowledge is sequestered. It's a major shift from consuming a commercial product to participating in a specialized exchange of data and genetics.
So this brings us to the future. Ang has the substrate dialed in, the mechanical and biological filtration is understood, the lighting constraints are accepted, and the supply chain is being upgraded.
Right.
So where do you go for the next 100 posts? You scale up. But Ang's plans to scale up introduce an entirely new category of headaches.
Oh, definitely. Scaling always reveals the hidden friction in a system.
So Ang wants to continue breeding, but also wants to acquire new species. Immediately, Ang identifies 2 severe bottlenecks.
Okay.
The first is price, which makes sense if you're buying specialized genetics, but the second is gender identification. And I found this super fascinating. Why is telling a male fish from a female fish such a massive operational bottleneck?
Because in a lot of these specialized cichlid species, sexual dimorphism, meaning the visual differences between sexes, is incredibly subtle. And sometimes it's entirely absent when they're juveniles.
Wait, they just look identical.
They look completely identical. And in some species, subdominant males will actually intentionally suppress their own coloration to mimic females.
Really? Why?
So the dominant male doesn't view them as a threat and attack them.
Wow.
So you go to a breeder, you look at a tank of juveniles, and you simply cannot definitively pick a male and a female. To guarantee you get a breeding pair, you basically have to buy a group of 6 or 8 fish, wait for them to mature, and let them pair off naturally.
Which instantly slams you right back into the first bottleneck, the price.
Exactly.
If a rare fish is expensive and you have to buy 6 of them just to play the genetic lottery, your budget gets totally obliterated.
And your spatial budget gets obliterated too.
Yeah.
You now have to house 6 adult cichlids, manage their aggression, and eventually figure out how to rehome all the ones that don't pair off. It is a logistical nightmare.
And speaking of logistical nightmares, Aang is also expanding beyond these single-species breeding tanks.
Right, the community tanks.
Yeah, the notes outline plans for outdoor balcony ponds and indoor community tanks featuring betas, gouramis, swordtails, and guppies. From a systems perspective, this feels like an exponential jump in difficulty.
It is a fundamental shift in philosophy, honestly. A single-species breeding tank is an exercise in optimizing a single variable. You manipulate the entire environment to serve the exact needs of one specific organism.
Okay.
But a community tank is an exercise in managing compromises.
Because what is optimal for the guppy might be deeply stressful for the gourami.
Exactly. You are trying to find the overlapping Venn diagram of tolerance for multiple species that come from completely different geographic regions.
That sounds impossible.
It's tricky. You have to balance the water flow, because the swordtails might like a strong current, but the betta, with its long fins, will get exhausted and stressed out by it.
Right.
And you have to manage the sight lines. You break up the territory with plants and driftwood so the semi-aggressive gouramis don't corner the smaller fish. You're no longer just maintaining water chemistry, you're managing a complex, multi-layered social architecture.
And as if that isn't enough to manage, Aang drops the most relatable detail at the very end of this post.
The racks.
Yes. After all this discussion of biological algorithms, nitrogen cycles, and sexual dimorphism, Aang admits that the biggest challenge going forward is simply organizing the fish room, the rack arrangement, trying to find the physical space to stack these tanks safely, while also juggling entirely separate hobbies like gardening. It's like you can master the chemistry, but fighting with your shelving units is the ultimate boss fight.
It really is, because it forces the theoretical into the physical. When you're dealing with aquariums, you are dealing with the sheer, undeniable mass of water. A gallon of water weighs roughly 8.3 pounds.
Wow.
So a modest rack holding 3 40-gallon breeder tanks is supporting over 1,000 pounds of dead weight.
It's literally structural engineering at that point.
It is. It's weight distribution. It's ensuring your floor joists can actually handle the load.
Oh, man, yeah.
It's managing the electrical draw of multiple heaters and pumps so you don't trip a breaker and crash the life support of 3 ecosystems all at once. It's even ensuring you actually have the physical clearance to siphon water out of the bottom tank without breaking your back.
Right.
The transition from a casual hobbyist to a master tinkerer like Aang, it isn't just about understanding the fish. It's about mastering the physical logistics and the resource management required to sustain that knowledge.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. The fish are just the inhabitants. Aang is basically the manager of the municipal infrastructure keeping them alive.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. Just to recap the sheer amount of ground we've covered. Aang's 300th post is a testament to the power of iteration. We explored the cost-effective brilliance of using construction sand to protect the biomechanics of earth-eating cichlids. We mapped the biological necessity of the sponge filter to process the bioload. We looked at the hard constraints of the 6-hour sun rule and the PAR values needed for aquatic plants. And we examined the shift from single variable optimization to the really intense logistical friction of managing community tanks and 1,000-pound shelving racks.
It's a journey that proves the value of mapping the battlefield, even if the initial experiment doesn't go your way.
Absolutely. And for you listening, that is the core takeaway. True expertise doesn't emerge from instant perfection. It is forged in limited success.
Right.
It comes from failing to breed a fish, but accidentally learning everything there is to know about your tap water's buffering capacity. It's about showing up, observing the variables, and adjusting the inputs day after day.
And, the principles Aang is applying to these tanks, they scale up to disciplines far beyond fish keeping. I want to leave you with a final thought on that.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've spent this time discussing closed systems, bioloads, and the impossibility of faking the underlying environment just to get a desired result. Consider how often we ignore those exact rules when managing large-scale human systems.
How do you mean?
Think about urban planning or software architecture or even economic policy. So often, we try to force a top-down result like mandating a new piece of software in a company or rezoning a neighborhood without first balancing the underlying bioload of the system.
Oh, wow.
We expect the environment to just absorb the new inputs naturally. But as Eng discovered, if you don't build the mechanical infrastructure first, if you don't install the organizational sponge filter to process the added stress, or ensure the structural racks can literally hold the weight the system doesn't just underperform, it crashes.
Right.
So in whatever complex system you are managing, ask yourself, are you just demanding a result, or are you actually building the biological infrastructure required to sustain it?
Are you just tossing fish in a glass box, or are you engineering the ecosystem? That brings us completely full circle. We might want to be the architect, punching in the code and expecting perfect obedience. But reality demands that we act as the diplomat, negotiating with the variables, respecting the constraints, and making the structural adjustments that keep the whole thing from crashing down. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.